Happiness doesn't depend on what you have or what you're missing, but rather on a daily decision. This is the story a 92-year-old grandfather told his grandson, who was drowning in despair, and it transformed him forever. Stay with me, because this isn't just any story. It's the most closely guarded secret to being happy no matter what happens. Once upon a time, in a small town nestled in the valley between rolling hills, there lived a young man. That young man was not happy. His heart lived in constant restlessness, dissatisfied, as if something was always missing. He worried too much about the future. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to provide for his family and complained constantly about the scarcity that knocked at his door. As he walked through town, he saw others prospering more than him, and the comparison filled him with bitterness. He felt like he worked hard, but life gave him nothing back. While some enjoyed laughter and peace, he carried the heavy feeling of being trapped in an existence without shine, watching happiness pass by without ever stopping for him. Every morning he woke with a weight on his chest, as if the world itself was pressing down on him. He looked at his neighbors and saw them smile, saw them gather on their porches with ease, and wondered why that same lightness never found its way to his own heart. He had a wife who loved him, children who depended on him, a roof over his head, yet none of it seemed enough. There was always something missing, always something he couldn't name but felt with crushing certainty. The worry about tomorrow consumed his today. He thought about bills unpaid, about the thinning wallet, about the judgment in people's eyes when they looked at his worn boots and faded shirt. He compared himself endlessly to men who seemed to have it all together, men whose trucks were newer, whose laughter was louder, whose lives appeared blessed while his felt cursed. In the same town, but in a more distant neighborhood, on the edge where the pavement turned to gravel, lived his grandfather, a 92-year-old man who spent his days in a simple house surrounded by silence. The young man had known him all his life. He had seen how he lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago, how he faced diabetes and heart trouble, how he lived through the Depression and 2 wars and the loss of his youngest son in Vietnam, and yet he never heard him complain. Not once. He always saw him serene, with an inner peace that seemed unshakable, like a mountain that weathers every storm without crumbling. The old man would sit on his porch in his rocking chair, looking out at the world with eyes that had seen too much suffering, but somehow still held kindness. One day, overwhelmed by sadness and feeling like he was drowning in his own discontent, the young man decided to visit his grandfather. When he arrived, the gravel crunching under his boots, he found him sitting on that same porch, looking at the sky like someone contemplating an old friend, watching the clouds drift by with the patience of someone who has learned that rushing changes nothing. "Grandpa," said the young man, his voice choking with emotion he'd been holding back for months. "I've seen you face so many trials in life, even losing Grandma, and I've never seen you complain. You always stay calm. You always seem happy. I don't understand how you do it. I have a family, I have good things, but I'm not happy. How do you do it?" His grandfather looked at him with sweetness in his aged eyes and smiled as if he had been waiting for this question his whole life, as if he knew this moment would come eventually. "My son," he said with a measured voice that carried the weight of decades, "some days are good and others are bad, but I learned that happiness doesn't come from what happens on the outside, but from what we keep inside us. It's not about the circumstances, son. It's about the choice we make every single morning when we open our eyes." His grandson looked at him with the eyes of a child searching desperately for answers to questions he couldn't even fully form. "And how can I achieve that? How do I learn to be happy when everything feels so heavy?" The grandfather closed his eyes for a moment, and a small smile crossed his weathered face. And then he said, "I'm going to tell you a story. A story my own grandfather told me when I was much younger than you, when I was about your age and felt just as lost as you do now. Those words marked my life forever and made me understand what happiness really means. It changed everything for me, son. Everything." The young man, moved by his grandfather's words and the tenderness in his voice, sat down beside him in silence on the old wooden steps of the porch, ready to listen carefully to that story that was about to mark his heart forever. The old man looked him straight in the eyes, breathed serenely, let the evening breeze wash over them both, and said in a low but firm voice, "Pay attention to my words, my son, because within this story hides a secret my grandfather taught me. And now I'm passing it to you. There once was a young wolf who belonged to a strong pack deep in the mountains. There he had everything a wolf could want: abundant food from successful hunts, companionship from his brothers and sisters, and protection from the strength of the pack. But deep in his heart, he wasn't happy. He always felt like something was missing, as if his life lacked meaning or purpose. He constantly complained about what he had and what he didn't have. He said the deer they hunted was never enough, or wasn't as flavorful as he wanted, wasn't as satisfying as he imagined it should be. He looked at other wolves from neighboring packs when they crossed paths at the river and thought they were stronger, faster, more admired than him. "Why do they get more than me?" he murmured with bitterness growing in his chest like a cancer. "Why does my life seem so ordinary, so empty? Why am I not the strongest, the fastest, the one everyone respects?" He worried too much about the future, fearing that one day everything would end. The food would run out, the security would crumble, the companionship would disappear. He spent more time sighing for what he didn't have than enjoying what was right in front of him. Meanwhile, the pack laughed and played in the snow, howled together under the full moon, and gave thanks for each day they had together. But he remained trapped in his complaints, his comparisons, his endless discontent that poisoned every good moment. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see in his blindness of self-pity, was that the worst was yet to come, because in the kingdom of wolves, young males are driven out when they reach a certain age to forge their own path, to find their own territory, to become their own leaders. So the day came, inevitable as winter, when his own father, the old alpha wolf of the pack with gray streaking his muzzle, called him aside away from the others. With a firm but serene voice, he told him he could no longer stay there. It was time to find his own way away from the group, time to become a man, time to stop being a boy who complained and start being a wolf who survived. Without further words, without sentiment or apology, the father looked at him seriously with eyes that held both love and firmness and drove him out, forcing him to leave the pack and face the wilderness alone. Banished, exiled, cast out. The young wolf walked without fixed direction, dragging his steps through the vast wilderness, through forests he'd never explored alone, across meadows that seemed to stretch forever. Each sunset found him alone, remembering with resentment the moment he was separated from his own. He complained in silence, convinced that injustice had fallen upon him like a cruel judgment. In his interior, there was no learning, no humility, no understanding of the lesson being taught, only a growing unhappiness that consumed him, as if exile had been an impossible wound to close, a wound that bled and never stopped bleeding. At first, in those early days of solitude, he believed he could handle everything. He had learned to hunt by watching the older wolves, had learned to fight in playful battles with his siblings, and thought he knew how to survive. But soon, faster than he expected, the real problems began. He failed in many hunts, his inexperience showing in every missed opportunity. He went entire days without eating, his stomach growling and cramping, his strength failing. His once proud howl that echoed through the mountains became increasingly weak, barely more than a whimper. He complained about his luck, blamed life for being unfair, blamed his father for being cruel, and gave no thanks for anything. This was how that young wolf lived, between crushing solitude that made him question his sanity, frustration that burned in his chest like fire, and the bitterness of feeling empty and unhappy and forgotten by the world. One morning, after 3 days of hunger and exhaustion that made his legs shake, the wolf had the opportunity to attack a distracted elk that had wandered away from its herd. It was his lucky break, maybe his only chance. With the force of his instinct and desperation, he managed to bring it down after a fierce struggle, and for a moment he thought fortune was finally smiling on him again. His chest filled with joy for the first time since his exile, and he thought he would finally have a feast worthy of a king, something to fill his empty belly and restore his strength. But then he heard them. The harsh laughter and yipping of coyotes, who, attracted by the smell of blood on the wind, surrounded him with shamelessness and superior numbers. There were many, maybe 8 or 9, and he, weakened by solitude and hunger and days without rest, could do little against so many. Between snarls and snapping teeth and defensive blows, he barely managed to save an insignificant piece of meat, a crumb he could barely drag away to eat in hiding. While the coyotes devoured his hard-won prey amid their mocking laughter and satisfied growls, the wolf walked away defeated, dragging himself into the bushes, chewing that meager piece with fury and sadness and shame. Each bite tasted of defeat, bitter and wrong. He complained in a low voice, wondering why life denied him what he believed he deserved, what he had worked for, what he had risked everything to get. And in that bitter mixture of hunger still gnawing at him and sadness that crushed his spirit, his unhappiness oppressed him, sinking him deeper into a pit of frustration and emptiness that seemed to have no bottom. The next day, hunger roared louder than he did, louder than any howl he could muster. His paws barely held up his weakened body, trembling with every step. His fur, once thick and beautiful and a symbol of pride, seemed dull and unkempt, matted with dirt and burrs. He wandered for hours under the scorching sun, his tongue hanging out, his vision blurring at the edges, until on the brink of collapse, until he thought he might just lie down and never get up again, he found what remained of a dead deer carcass that had been there for days. The meat was already dry and tough, torn apart by other predators, picked over by vultures, and covered in dust and crawling with flies. But he had no choice. With a gesture of disgust and defeat that made him hate himself, he sank his teeth into that remnant. Never before, in all his life as a prince of the pack, in all his days of complaining about food that wasn't good enough, had he reached such misery. Never had he imagined he would be reduced to this. Each mouthful tasted of shame and failure. Each dry fiber he tore off with effort reminded him that he was no longer a wolf of respect, but rather a banished one who survived on scraps, no better than a scavenger. And as he swallowed with difficulty, nearly choking on the rotten meat, a bitter complaint sprouted from within his very soul. Why me? Why has life treated me with such cruelty? What did I do to deserve this? The emptiness in his stomach barely yielded even after eating, but the emptiness in his heart grew even more, expanding like a black hole. His unhappiness oppressed him like a relentless shadow that followed him everywhere. And every time he thought of his old place beside the pack, of the warmth of sleeping surrounded by his family, of the easy meals and the companionship, rage and sadness consumed him until he could barely breathe. With the weight of hunger still marking his bones, making them ache, the young wolf made a desperate decision: to seek his own pack, to find others who might accept him, to build something new. He walked long distances, following the scent of others of his kind, with the illusion of being accepted, or at least of founding his own kingdom where he would be respected. Upon arriving at a valley after days of travel, he spotted a strong pack of at least 15 wolves, led by an adult male with abundant thick fur and a fierce gaze that spoke of dominance. With steps he tried to make firm, although his spirit was exhausted and his body weak. He approached with a howl that barely came from his throat, trying to show courage he didn't feel. But the response was immediate and brutal and terrifying. The alpha leader attacked him with claws and teeth, launching himself through the air, making him retreat between snarls and yelps of pain. Every attempt to approach, every effort to prove himself, was answered with violence and rejection. The message was clear, until finally he was expelled without mercy, chased away from the territory by 3 younger males who nipped at his heels. There was no space for him there, not in that territory, nor in that group, nor anywhere it seemed. And so lived that young wolf, wandering between trials and defeats that seemed endless, between one failure and the next. His fur, once a promise of royalty and strength, was now rough, uneven, and without shine, falling out in patches. More than prince of the wilderness, he looked like a vagabond of dust and wind, a ghost of what he once was. Instead of being grateful for the life he still had, for the air in his lungs and the ground under his paws, he consumed himself in laments, reclaiming about his luck, his solitude, and each wound he carried, both physical and emotional. He didn't understand that complaining made him more unhappy, more enslaved than exile itself. He didn't see that his attitude was his real prison. One night, as the moon rose silently over the wilderness, casting everything in silver light, the young wolf sank to the ground and let out a muffled howl that wasn't of strength or challenge, but of exhaustion and complaint and surrender. He lay down on the dry earth, his ribs showing through his mangy fur, repeating in his mind the injustices of his life, the hunger, the rejection, the defeats, the loneliness. Each thought was one more weight on his spirit, pressing him down into the dirt. Then, suddenly cutting through his misery, a flapping of wings interrupted the silence. A dark raven with feathers that shone like oil under the silver moonlight perched on a nearby branch, his intelligent eyes watching the broken wolf below. With a hoarse but firm voice, he spoke, "Friend wolf, what troubles you? I see you sad, broken, dejected." The wolf, surprised that any creature would speak to him, looked at the bird with disdain and bitterness. He growled with irony, "And what would you know, raven? You're nothing more than a bird of ill omen. Your shadow only announces more misfortune for my already cursed life." The raven didn't flinch or fly away. He observed him calmly, tilting his head, like someone who understands more than they appear to, and responded with patience, "You're mistaken, wolf. I too lived like that once, carrying complaint like a stone around my neck, seeing only the dark side of everything, waiting for the world to change while I myself was sinking deeper. It's not life that expels you. It's you who reject it with each lament, with each word of bitterness." Silence fell again, heavy and thick, but it was no longer the same. The wolf was thoughtful, disturbed, because for the first time someone confronted him without claws or teeth, only with truth that cut deeper than any wound, however much it hurt to hear. The young wolf, with a voice choked by emotion he'd been holding back, asked the raven desperately, "And how did you manage to get out of that life of pain and unhappiness? How did you escape?" The raven looked at him with eyes that reflected the moonlight, ancient and knowing, and responded, "I too knew hunger, solitude, and mockery," said the raven with a grave voice that carried the weight of experience. "My dark plumage was a reason for contempt. Other birds avoided me. They called me a bird of ill omen and compared me unfavorably to the bright songbirds, to the majestic eagles. I lost family and friends to storms and predators and the cruelty of nature, and in my bitterness I took refuge in complaint, believing it was my shield, believing it would protect me somehow. But soon I discovered that this complaint only attracted more pain and sank me into endless unhappiness, deeper and deeper until I couldn't see daylight anymore. Until one day an ancient turtle taught me what it really means to live, what it really means to be free." Are you enjoying this story? I can see you are, and I want you to comment this phrase, "God wants my happiness and guides me with love." And I want to tell you something important. 95.5% of those who watch these videos aren't subscribed. So I ask you from the bottom of my heart to subscribe to the channel so I can continue bringing you more stories like this one. Also remember that at the end of this video, you'll find more stories waiting for you on your screen. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being part of this community, for being here with me. The wolf's eyes opened with a glimmer of hope, breaking through the despair, the first light he'd felt in so long. "Where can I find her? Please tell me where," he asked with urgency and anxiety. The raven flapped his wings slowly and with a deep voice said, "If you truly want to find the turtle, if you're serious about changing, you'll have to prove yourself. She lives in the Eastern Valley, far beyond mountains and rivers, beyond the places you know. She doesn't appear to just anyone who wanders by. She only lets herself be found by those who guard humility in their heart and dare to seek with effort, even when everything seems lost, even when the path seems impossible. So if you still guard humility somewhere in your heart, if there's anything left of who you could be, go look for her. The wolf, still weak and with unkempt fur hanging in clumps, felt a small spark ignite within him for the first time since exile. It wasn't happiness yet, not even close, but it was something. It was the beginning of a path, the first step towards something different. The raven gently beat his black wings and looked at the wolf with a deep calm that seemed to come from somewhere beyond this world. "Remember this, brother of the earth," he said with a firm but serene voice. "Life doesn't straighten out with laments, nor is it relieved with complaints. Each wound can be a weight that drags you down, or it can be a teacher that lifts you up. What you do with them, how you carry them, will mark your destiny." With the last beat of his powerful wings, he rose gracefully into the sky, becoming a silhouette against the moon, leaving the wolf alone once again, but with a spark burning in his chest, the feeling that there was still something more to discover, something more to become. At dawn, when the first rays of sun broke over the horizon painting everything gold, the wolf got up with his body still weak and protesting, but with a determination he had never felt before in his entire life. His paws trembled under his weight. His tangled fur fell over his tired eyes, making it hard to see. But in his chest burned the decision to change, to become something different. "No matter what it costs me," he said to himself with fierce resolution, "no matter how hard the journey, I need answers. I need to change." He advanced through arid lands and rough paths, through territories he'd never seen, where solitude was heavier than hunger, where the silence was deafening. He crossed dry fields under merciless sun, endured heat that made the air shimmer, climbed rocky slopes that cut his paws, and pushed through the dusty breeze that stung his eyes. And although his physical strength was little, barely enough to keep moving, his will was firm as iron, unbreakable. After days of walking that blurred together, after sleeping in cold caves and drinking from muddy streams, he climbed with tremendous effort up a small hill that seemed to go on forever, his muscles screaming. Upon reaching the top, his eyes opened wide with astonishment at what lay before him. At his feet stretched a majestic valley covered by a green so vibrant it seemed impossible, lush and alive, contrasting sharply with the entire barren path he had traveled. The air was different here, clean and fresh and somehow pure. In the middle of the valley shone a crystalline spring that seemed to pulse with life of its own, surrounded by wildflowers he'd never seen. "Here, this must be the Turtle's Valley," he murmured with a thread of voice, almost incredulous, afraid to believe it was real. With slow, careful steps, hardly daring to breathe, he descended into the valley and, upon entering this sacred space, began to ask the creatures he encountered. A majestic bear, massive and powerful, surprised to see a wolf in such poor condition, respectfully pointed with his great paw toward the spring. Small birds without fear, landing on branches near him, told him in their chirping voices that there lived a very ancient turtle, guardian of secrets that she only revealed to those who were truly ready to listen, to those who came with humble hearts. The wolf, tired but with his heart burning with desperate hope, followed their directions carefully. With each step he took toward the spring, he felt as if he was approaching not just the turtle, but also a truth he had been seeking his whole life without knowing it, the answer to questions he couldn't even name. The wolf finally arrived at a spring unlike anything he had ever seen or imagined. The air was fresh and sweet, carrying the scent of flowers. The murmur of the water seemed like an eternal song, ancient and peaceful, surrounded by wildflowers in colors that seemed to glow, giving the sensation that life itself had decided to dwell in this place. Cautiously, with reverence, he approached. On the edge of the spring sat the ancient turtle, completely motionless like a stone, with closed eyes, immersed in deep meditation. Her shell, worn and scarred by time, seemed to contain the memory of centuries, of ages long past. The water reflected her silhouette perfectly, as if nature itself recognized her as guardian of an ancestral secret. The wolf, tired and with a voice he couldn't quite find, didn't dare interrupt her meditation. He simply sat in front of her on the soft grass, letting silence speak for him, trying to calm his racing heart. Minutes, or perhaps hours, passed, in which the only sounds were the flow of water and the wind moving gently through the branches and his own breathing. Time seemed to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the turtle slowly opened her eyes, and in them there was no surprise or fear, only deep knowing. It was as if she already knew of his arrival, had been waiting for him. "You walked with hunger, with thirst, and with exhaustion," she said with a serene voice like flowing water, not yet looking at him directly. "And yet, here you are. What do you seek, young king?" The wolf lowered his gaze to the ground, feeling that words weighed more than any of his wounds, more than all his suffering combined. "I seek to learn to live," he responded with barely a thread of voice. "I'm tired of complaint, of emptiness, of being a prisoner of myself and my own thoughts. I want to change. Please, help me change." The turtle nodded slowly, closing her eyes again, like someone who hears something already known, a story told many times before. "If you seek to change, first you must dare to look at yourself without fear, without hiding." "Tell me then what troubles you, wandering wolf," she asked, with a voice serene and measured, pausada like the murmur of the water that surrounded them. The wolf lowered his gaze further, and with a trembling voice cracking with emotion, began to speak. "I am not happy. I've never been happy, not really. I belonged to a pack once. I had everything. I lost it all. Now I walk among shadows, carrying guilt that crushes me, anger that burns inside me, and memories that don't leave me in peace even for a moment. I feel exiled from myself, trapped in my pride and my misfortune. I've lost faith in myself, turtle. I walk by day as if carrying an extinguished sun inside, cold and dead, and at night the complaint that won't let me sleep pursues me like a demon. Sometimes I feel I'm nothing more than a memory of what I once was, a ghost of a wolf that died." He paused, his voice breaking completely, lowering his head in shame. "That's why I came here, because I don't know how to start over. I don't know how to be different. Please, wise turtle, tell me the secret to being happy. I'm begging you." The turtle listened to him in complete silence, without interrupting even once, as if each word from the wolf had a sacred space in the air, as if his pain deserved to be heard fully. With a serene voice full of compassion, she responded, "My son," she said with a measured voice, "what you feel is part of the journey, part of becoming who you're meant to be. Many believe that being strong means never breaking, never showing weakness. But the true strength lies in accepting that we are also vulnerable, that we can be wounded. Pain didn't make you less wolf. On the contrary, it gave you a depth you didn't know before, wisdom you couldn't have gained any other way." The wolf looked at her with skepticism still lingering in his eyes, as if still doubting his own strength, doubting anything could help him. The turtle continued with infinite patience. "I want you to remember this and hold it close. If there is one being in this universe who wants all the beings of this world to be happy, it is the Almighty Creator. He sowed in you a strength that even you don't know exists, strength you haven't discovered yet, and He waits patiently for you to awaken it. Sometimes, life's silence is not emptiness or abandonment, it's preparation for something greater." The turtle closed her eyes for a few seconds, breathing deeply, and then added with conviction, "The Almighty God placed in you a seed of light, wolf. Although today you see it buried under the earth of pain and suffering, that seed remains alive, waiting to grow. Your task is not to protect yourself with complaint, but rather to overcome it with patience and faith. When you do that, when you finally break free, you will see that your howl will again have meaning and purpose, not as a cry of despair, but as a song of purpose, as a declaration of who you really are." The young wolf lowered his head and murmured desperately, "But how do I do that? How do I stop being a prisoner of my complaint and my unhappiness? How does one change an entire life, everything I've become? And how do I awaken that strength you talk about? The turtle slowly opened her eyes fully, and her voice sounded like a river flowing serenely through ancient stones. Begin with simple steps. Don't try to change everything at once. First, give thanks each day for what you have, even if it seems little or insignificant. The heart that gives thanks becomes light and free. Repeat each morning when you wake and each night before you sleep. Thank you, my God, for everything you give me, whether much or little, including what I don't understand, including the trials. Second, learn to silence your complaints. Each time you want to curse your luck, to speak words of bitterness, remember that from your mouth can also come a blessing instead. When you feel anger rising, say, "Today I choose to speak life and not curse. Today I choose gratitude." Third, don't walk alone in your thoughts. Don't carry everything by yourself. Pray, speak with the Creator like a friend who listens. Tell him your sorrows without holding back, because he listens and responds in the silences of the soul, in ways you'll learn to recognize. Say in your interior with faith, "My God, I trust in you completely. I know you are with me, even though I don't see you, even when I feel alone." Fourth, forgive even when it hurts terribly. Forgive your father, forgive the coyotes, forgive life, forgive yourself. Forgiveness doesn't free the other. It frees you from the chains you've wrapped around yourself. Each time resentment touches your soul like poison, say, "My God, I place this wound in your hands. Help me to heal and to let go of this burden." And fifth, believe in the purpose the Creator sowed in you. You are not an accident or a mistake. You are part of a greater plan. When you doubt yourself, when the darkness comes, declare with conviction, "God wants my happiness and guides me with love." The turtle paused, letting her words sink deep into his soul, and then added with firmness, "Don't try to change everything at once. That's not how it works. God doesn't ask you to be perfect tomorrow. He asks you that today you take a different step from yesterday. Just one step. True change doesn't arrive with howls and thunder, but with quiet constancy, with daily choices." The turtle closed her eyelids slowly, and with a deep sigh of satisfaction, kept silent. Her teaching was complete. The wolf bowed his head in sign of deep respect and gratitude, and undertook the journey back to the wilderness with a lighter heart. Upon returning to the harsh lands he knew, something in his interior was no longer the same. He had been changed. He began to give thanks when he woke, to pray in silence under the stars at night, and to stop complaining about everything. Little by little, day by day, his life began to transform in ways he couldn't have imagined. The young wolf became strong and majestic over time. His fur grew dark and thick and shining, as a sign of his maturity and health returning. With time and patience, he formed his own pack, attracting others who saw his strength and wisdom. He guided them with wisdom, learned through suffering, and learned that true happiness wasn't in howling louder than others, or being the strongest, or having the most, but rather in having a heart capable of being grateful and of stopping complaint. And so the wolf, who once felt lost and broken and worthless, found in the wisdom of a turtle and in the guidance of the Creator the path to a full life, a life of meaning and purpose. When his grandfather finished telling him the story, the young man remained completely quiet, deeply moved. He felt that that story his grandfather had told him hadn't been just a tale to pass time, but a mirror in which he saw reflected his own life with painful clarity, his complaints, his endless comparisons, his fears that kept him paralyzed. Like the young wolf, he too had forgotten to give thanks for what he had. He too had allowed unhappiness and complaint to feed on his laments, to grow like weeds choking out any joy. "So, Grandpa," he said with a voice choked with emotion, tears forming in his eyes, "you mean that I too can change, even feeling trapped in all this, even feeling hopeless?" His grandfather smiled with infinite tenderness, resting his trembling hand on his grandson's shoulder with love. "Of course, my son. Happiness is not a distant goal you'll reach someday. It's a path that begins to be walked with small steps today, right now. Give thanks, stop complaining, speak with God, forgive those who hurt you and yourself, believe in your purpose. Do this each day, and little by little your life will change, just like the wolf's life changed. His grandson lowered his head, and for the first time in a very long time, a tear rolled down his cheek, not of sadness or frustration, but of relief and hope. He hugged his grandfather tightly with all his strength, feeling in that embrace the peace he had sought for so long, the peace that had always been just out of reach. That night, upon returning to his house as darkness fell, not everything had changed on the outside. The table was still simple, covered with the same worn cloth. The worries were still present, waiting for him. But something inside him had awakened. Something fundamental had shifted. Before sleeping, he closed his eyes, and with a low voice but full of genuine faith for the first time, whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, my God, for everything I have, including what I don't understand, including the struggles." And that's how that young man, thanks to the story of a wolf and the profound wisdom of his grandfather, began to discover the secret of true happiness. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for staying with me. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that might change your life. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, what you felt, what resonated with your own journey. Thank you for accompanying us on this emotional journey. You're not alone.